ask Steve a few questions. We're going to have a chat for about half an hour and then come out to all of you for questions, comments and thoughts. So please have them then ready. Steve, I want to start with quite a broad question. So one of the things we try and do at Onward is persuade the Conservative Party, folks on the centre-right, that the environment is at the core of some of the things that we believe. And we try and draw on the history of thought on the centre-right to make the case that the environment matters. And I'm curious, you know, you're recently into this role. It's clearly something that you care about deeply. How do you try and position the environment within that Labour tradition? What do you draw on, and how do you make the case to colleagues who are dealing with a variety of challenges that the issues that come under your brief are key?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me. It's I'm really pleased to do this event with Onward, and thanks everyone for coming in. You all know we had a reshuffle not long ago, so I've been in the brief a bit over 3 weeks, I think. So I'm still, you know, when you get a new brief as broad as this, I think you're wise to get out there and listen, particularly given that there are so many campaign groups and environmental groups and organisations, and they've been very generous with their time, thousands of them, to take part in my induction. So you know, I think there is a need for a genuine conversation here. But talking about the environment, why it matters to me, why it matters to Labour. If you look back at Labour's tradition, you know, Angela in her speech, I don't know if you heard it, was repeating that quote, "Give us bread, but give us roses." Labour's not just about giving people the means by which you can live a basic life. It's about giving people a rich quality of life so you can enjoy that life. And that's always been part of the Labour tradition, and even the predecessors of the Labour Party, you know, the syndicalists, the trade unions, the cooperative movements, all of them wanted to give people in our burgeoning urban environments during the Industrial Revolution access to green space, access to clean water, access to countryside. It's good for your well-being, it's good for your health. But you know what Blake called this green and pleasant land. It's part of our shared inheritance. It's not just for the landowners or those who are lucky enough to live in the countryside and work in the countryside. It shapes our history as a country, and it is something that should be open to everybody. And that's always been there in Labour's tradition. And I think it was some of that thinking or that approach that led to Labour, when we've been in government previously, establishing the first national parks, for instance, or being the first government in the world to establish a climate change act that sets legal reduction targets for climate, with the understanding of the need for clean air as well. So it's always been a big part of Labour, this. I mean, inevitably, you have a human being in any of these posts when you get reshuffled, and I have my own views as well on nature. I was born and brought up in St Albans, so just outside London, but with a lot of access to countryside. I was really lucky. At the end of our road, there were fields and farms, and we used to go and play at it. And I'm very aware, representing a constituency in inner London, Croydon North, a lot of kids there don't have access even to garden space, let alone to parks or woodland or farmland in the way that we did. And that affects those kids' mental health. If they're cooped up indoors, they want access to it. I find for myself, you know, my job is stressful at times, and many people's work is stressful. But for me, and it's always been like this as an adult, and some of my friends think it's a bit strange, but I relax the fastest if I'm in a field. So, you know, I will always spend some of my summer holidays with a tent and go camping with friends, and I just find that incredibly restorative of my well-being. And I want, you know, this sense that we should all have access to nature. It shouldn't be just closed off to large swathes of the population, and that nature is something we must safeguard. Not just so that more people in this generation can have access to it, but for future generations as well. And the climate and the nature crises are so intimately linked. I don't think we can see the two as separate. So I think there's a lot of work to do to develop a really strong agenda for Labour that covers nature and the countryside and rural and coastal communities and farming, and where there are conflicts, as there always are going to be within agendas, then the job of a sensible government is to create the space for a negotiation and for compromise so that we can negotiate for the common good.
And one of the things that we've kind of worked on before, or talked about before, is kind of Onward's work on the social fabric, on relationships, why they matter, why community, why civil society matters. And as you just alluded to, some of the communities that are most challenged where that social fabric has frayed are rural communities, are coastal communities, are those that have not necessarily benefited from some of the growth that we've seen in cities, probably not enough, but there's at least been a kind of economic uplift that has provided opportunity that have been lacking in other places. As you're thinking about your brief and your personal interest in community power in community, how is that influencing your policies as well? What to do?
Yeah, great question that as well. I mean, if anyone knows my background, I was leader of Lambeth Council before I was an MP, and we pursued a way of running the council that we called a cooperative council, which was about giving communities, neighbourhoods and public service users much more control over the services that they used. The insight was that their experience of their own lives and the challenges they faced, if they were able to get the people providing the service to respond to them, would lead to far better outcomes for them, and it did. And you know, the example which I think was the most dramatic was Lambeth Children's Services. When we won the council from the Tories and Lib Dems, it was rated in the bottom 3% nationally. When I left 6 years later, those children's services were rated the best in the country, and still the only council to have ever been rated outstanding in every single category of children's services. The insight was not mine or any of us as politicians. The insight was the kids in care, their carers, their parents, foster carers, who, because we changed, influenced the services to do more of what they wanted. Now, it's not such a dramatic leap to take an experience like that and apply it to the way that we talk to and about rural and coastal communities as well, because fundamentally I think that model of public decision making is really about respect. It's about recognising that we as politicians do not have all the answers, because we do not live all of the lives that people are living who are experiencing problems. But if we're prepared to win power, to open that power up to them, they will use that power in a way that is often smarter than we can. We can help by allocating resources and making sure the institutions and processes are there that allow people to assert voice, particularly the most vulnerable. They'll need support to do it because you know, they can't always advocate for themselves, so you have to work with other organisations. But I think that sometimes politics, Labour, Tory, whatever it is, can be quite disrespectful to people by telling them what they're going to get. And I genuinely believe if you do things with people and not to you, then you get better outcomes. And that worked for me in children's services in Lambeth. I believe it is the approach that we should use as a party to our rural and coastal communities. We have in the past had more rural seats were Labour than Conservative in 1997 and 2001. There's no reason that can't happen again, given the result we saw in the Selby by-election, a very rural constituency where we delivered the biggest swing to Labour since the Second World War from the Conservatives. There is real interest in rural communities now about what Labour could offer different to what they now see as well as a failed Conservative government. So I think a different tone and approach of politics and decision making is necessary.
And what do you see as some of the biggest challenges in those rural communities? I mean, some of them are familiar, but I know you've only been in brief a short time. But what are some of the things you think are underappreciated about the challenges those areas are facing, particularly by a media or a political conversation that is very urban, very focused on urban challenges?
Well, I mean, I think some of it is about power. You know, a lot of communities, rural, coastal communities, feel they don't have the power they need to make change happen on their own terms. And that is exactly the reason why it was the beginning of last year, I think. Keir Starmer was talking about Labour creating a Take Back Control Act. And that would work. You know, some of you would have seen Gordon Brown's report on devolution and localisation. The Take Back Control Act would be the means by which we would open up power and give communities the biggest shift of power from over-centralised control in Whitehall to regions and local communities. And that has to mean things for our rural communities communities as well. Why is it that private companies choose where the buses go and not the communities that will be using the buses and when they will be running? Broadband, another area. So much of our rural communities doesn't have access to broadband, and that deters people who would have moved there, who could work remotely, businesses that want to invest there and set up businesses there. In the farming sector, it curtails innovation and modernisation of farming. If we live in a globalised world now, and many other countries are investing in digitally controlled means of farming and harvesting, but you can't do it if there's no access to broadband. So we're really holding these areas back, and I want to see areas have much more control over decisions like that. The same with skills. Why are the decisions about what the local FE will be teaching kids taken by people who are far too remote from those communities, not understanding the aspirations of those communities or the needs of businesses in those areas? So I think we can turbocharge growth in those areas, and growth is a big theme you'll have all picked up from the planning for the next Labour government, but we want that growth to be everywhere. We don't want it to be just restricted to some parts of the country. We want everybody to experience growth. So that we're in a situation where we've had the worst decade for wage growth since the Great Depression of the 1930s, and that is one of the factors that's fueled the cost of living crisis. So we have to offer people in the countryside as well, in rural communities, that they will get their future back in a Labour government, and therefore it's worth them voting Labour as well.
DEFRA's sometimes been seen as a department with less controversy than others, right? One in which you're probably not going to have a Secretary of State or Shadow Secretary kind of bold as sticky wicket or in trouble, but actually you've kind of adopted a brief where there are a number of quite kind of controversial, thorny policy challenges. So if it's okay, I'm going to ask you about a few of them, and if the answer is I'm 3 weeks in, that's fine, that's okay. That's
my stock defence at the moment.
It definitely works for a month or so, right, at least. And I promise none of these questions are when are you going to unveil your meat tax. So
fake news.
So the first is about kind of agriculture and trade. So there was some controversy during the Conservative Party conference when Jacob Rees-Mogg kind of revealed his love for hormone-injected beef from Australia. And that kind of caught the headlines, but actually there's this, the trade-off he was pointing to was kind of consumers versus farmers to some degree, right? Or saying that is a trade-off, and if we want cheaper products for consumers, then we might need to adjust our standards, and we can do so post-Brexit. Now, obviously, anything that's adjacent to Brexit has immediately got some controversy in it, but how are you thinking about standards in agriculture, what that means for consumers and prices?
It's not going to be a vote winner for anyone, is it? But there are very, very serious issues underneath this, because our farmers, our producers, our growers were all told before the government came up with their withdrawal agreement that they would continue to have free access to the world's single biggest market, which is the European Union, right on our doorstep. And indeed that there would be no border down the Irish Sea, and those promises were broken. And the agreement comes up for renewal in 2025. So whoever wins the next election will be looking at that agreement. And that isn't because anyone wants to reopen the wounds of Brexit. Whether you're a Remainer, whether you're a Leaver, no one wants to go through the 5 or 6 years like the 5 or 6 years we had to go through before. So the only feasible option on the table is we have to make Brexit work. And it isn't working for too many parts of our country and industry at the moment. And for farmers in particular, there are real issues about exporting to the European Union because of the mountain of red tape that is required before you can export meat products and some other products into the European Union. So those markets have just collapsed for them. So we do need to renegotiate the veterinary agreement, which is the key part of the agreement that has led to the barriers that farmers are experiencing. And since 2019, I think 7,000 producers have gone out of business. It's not just because of the withdrawal agreement. There are other factors, rising fuel and energy costs as well, lack of labour, many issues affecting it. But this is one of them. And what we don't want to see is producers, growers going out of business because of a frankly arbitrary military deal that Boris Johnson signed when he shouldn't have signed. And what underpins this as well is alignment of standards between the UK and the European Union. The madness of it is that our standards are currently more or less aligned anyway. There's not that many areas where they differ. It is just that the UK reserves the right to potentially change its standards, therefore our producers and growers can't export and they're going bust and they're losing money. So why on earth would you have that situation when there's such an easy fix? So that's something we can offer straight away to the farming community, where the Conservatives, who have previously liked to see themselves as the party of the countryside, but clearly no longer are, have got it very badly wrong.
And another kind of post-Brexit issue that will be something that, if you do come into government, you'll inherit, but is clearly controversial now, is kind of acronym unknown by many and anxiety-inducing to some, ELMS, right, Environmental Land Management Scheme. As I understand it, Labour haven't come out with a formal position yet on whether they continue with ELMS or replace it with something else. Not pushing you to do that now, but what is your attitude to how some of those European Union policies should be replaced to, either provide public money for public goods when it comes to farmers, or do something different?
Yeah, I mean, well, actually, this one I can pronounce on, despite being so newly minted in my role. We will be keeping the ELMS system, Environmental Land Management System, on the grounds that there's no one in the sector that wants everything ripped up and start again. The level of uncertainty that would bring would be extremely unwelcome. But there's a period of review going on at the moment, and we're listening to the very serious concerns that farmers, growers and producers have about the scheme, including the fact that large parts of it appear to be financially unviable, which is clearly the thing can't work if it doesn't stack up financially. Tenant farmers and smaller growers and producers get almost nothing out of it, and so where you're seeing businesses really suffering, those are the ones that are suffering in particular, and they need and deserve our support. It's about a third of the whole sector, I think, and they're not getting the support that they need from it. But also, if we don't get a system of really, it's creating a land use framework that creates a balance between the need to produce food cost effectively, so that we don't see 19% food inflation like we were seeing earlier this year under this government, with also the need to protect the environment and to protect nature and to do an awful lot more to protect nature. The framework isn't achieving that if it's not worth producers' while to participate in the scheme. So it needs radical overhauling. It doesn't need total scrapping. So we're listening during the review period, and we'll come up with our proposals for exactly what that should look like in due course.
If there's the poster, make ELMS work, go for that.
Yeah, I'm not sure many people would vote for that. More than former executive chief, but anyway.
On would always go for an overly policy-wonky approach to politics. Let me ask you about another kind of controversial political issue at the moment, which is pollution, and particularly in terms of rivers and the shoreline. The Lib Dems in particular, and kind of all parties talking about it, the Lib Dems have made this a real focus of their campaigning, particularly in some rural communities, and are trying to own this issue. Some voices in the Conservative Party are kind of prioritising changes in measurement as opposed to a massive increase in pollution more recently. And there's a chance here for this to be an exemplar of what a Labour approach would be on balancing some of the trade-offs, again, when it comes to pollution, because there are all sorts of difficulties about how farmers approach kind of runoff and waste, about households and what they pay for waste companies. What's your kind of plan to tackle that challenge, and how central do you think it is to what we need to do?
Well, this is the one that gives the lie really to that line you used earlier. This isn't a controversial brief, because I got it my very first day in the job. I got a call from Keir in the morning saying you'd like me to do DEFRA. Thanks, Keir. I will do DEFRA. And then the next day, the BBC launched a great big investigation about the horrific outpouring of sewage into our rivers, into our lakes, into our seas, lapping up on our beaches. A horrible thing called sewage tomatoes, which I never knew of before. If anyone here doesn't know, I'm going to explain it to you because it tells you the extent of what's going on. But they're finding on beaches tomato plants growing, and you can go and pick the tomatoes if you want. But the reason that you won't, when you know how they got there, people have consumed tomatoes. The sewage is going into our rivers, it's getting into the seas, it's washing up on our beaches, and then the tomato seeds being fertilised are then growing. You get these things called sewage tomatoes growing on our beaches. It's horrific. But that is part of our bigger story, which is that last year we had the biggest amount of illegal sewage dumped into our waterways in history. That happened because the Conservative government, and Liz Truss, when she was environment to our waterways, of all the desecration and damage that does to nature and to wildlife and potentially to kids' health or trade, tourism and the rest of it. Yet while all that was going on, the same year the water companies, senior executives were able to pay themselves bonuses of nearly £10 million, recognising their own self-awarded success, and at the same time as that are proposing to put household water bills up by an average of £156 a year. Now, it seems to me entirely wrong that the water company executives responsible for that kind of pollution and law-breaking, that's what it is, can get away with giving themselves millions of pounds in bonuses while everyone else has to pay the price. Surely it's the polluter who should pay and not the consumer. So that's the approach we will take, and if we win the election, we'll put the water companies on special measures, and we will take action to ensure that they stop doing the polluting, including imposing automatic and severe fines for illegal sewage dumps, but also requiring mandatory monitoring of every outlet, which currently doesn't happen, so that we know exactly where that sewage is coming from, and impose personal criminal liability on the water bosses who are letting this happen. So a very different form of regulation, much tougher, but intended to focus the water companies on fixing the problem with a broken infrastructure that is allowing the sewage to get out into our nature where it's causing so much damage, and focus on fixing that rather than focus on putting the proceeds of the profits of failing to do that into their own pockets.
And that principle of using criminal liability for environmental damage for these sorts of firms, is that something that you're hoping to use as an instrument to prevent kind of environmental damage more broadly?
I think it's what you need to, when you've got such widespread law breaking, which is what is going on there, I think you have to take action of that kind. And I see this as fundamentally very pro-business as well. It's very pro-business because, good, decent businesses, the vast majority of businesses operate within the legal and regulatory framework. That's the level playing field that makes business and the economy work properly. If you get some businesses that can get away with breaking the law and make additional profits that way, then you haven't got a level playing field. So it supports business by stopping businesses that are breaking the law from doing that. In this case, it also allows us to protect nature. This isn't the only approach we're taking. You may have, I'm guessing people in the room are very interested in the environment and nature, but after the reshuffle, one of the first things that Angela Rayner and I did was that we got Labour into a position where we were opposing the government's plans to trash nutrient neutrality by building housing in areas where the waterways or wetlands were already overloaded with pollution in such a way that the additional housing would tip it over the edge to a point where nature would never be recoverable. Now, why would a government want to do that, given the crisis that we've already got with sewage? And the reason they want to do it is because they're trying to avoid building in other areas where Tory MPs don't want the houses to be built. Those happen to be the areas where people need the housing. So, as you all heard from Angela this morning, and I'm sure more with Rachel and Kinga coming up over the next 2 days, Labour's going to build the houses where they're needed, and we're not going to build in a way that trashes the environment. Pretty common sense, you think, but it's not what the Tories are doing.
So let me, I'm going to avoid going deep into nutrient neutrality because there's a whole conversation to be had there. Let me ask you, I guess more broadly, stepping back, about nature, because what was interesting is about in the way that nutrient neutrality debate played out is you saw the RSPB come out with quite a forthright Twitter thread that I think that they kind of withdrew, but certainly saw a fury from that organisation. And now, while the RSPB are one group among many, they have a huge number of members. I don't think it's, mad for me to say that those members would be traditional Tories, right? A lot of them would be at least small C Conservative. Do you spot, do you think there was an opportunity for Labour to kind of rule and focus on those voters? And if so, how? What sorts of policies about the protection, preservation of nature and the environment might you put forward?
Yeah, the RSPB is the biggest of those organisations, but in total there's some 20 million British people are members of heritage and nature organisations of that kind, including the National Trust. I'd be amazed if a lot of people in this room weren't. I am, and we're not traditional Tory voters, are we? So I think it's probably a bit more mixed than people might assume. But this government's got a terrible record on nature. It's almost like they don't care at all. The situation with sewage wouldn't have happened if they cared about nature. The situation with elms environmental land management wouldn't have happened if they had any intention of meeting the promises that they gave to rural communities and farmers while the withdrawal agreement was being negotiated. They've trashed nature. We're one of the most nature-depleted countries in the world. A quarter of our mammal species are at risk of extinction, and a third of our bird species. It's absolutely intolerable. And people join these organisations because they really care. And I think what we've not yet got from our party, but I see it as my job over the next year to develop it, is a real comprehensive approach to nature and protecting and preserving nature. What we're doing is stewarding it for future generations, and we can't allow it to be trashed in the way that it's been trashed. Ed Miliband, I think, has done fantastic work on the climate agenda. Proposals for GB energy, harnessing wind, wave, solar and nuclear power to take back control of our own energy. This is fantastic stuff, but there's much more we need to do looking at nature as a source of carbon capture and carbon storage, protecting and expanding our wetlands, our coastal environments, forests, peats, marshlands. So much we need to do. The Welsh government's been doing a lot better than the UK government has on this, but I want to see us really link the nature crisis with the climate crisis, because really they are a single crisis. Currently we're not there. So over the coming months I'm going to work with organisations who are working in these areas, and I think we really want to flesh that out as part of the work that Ed Miliband has been leading on his mission.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Whenever we do focus groups on the environment or climate and people say they prioritise it, when we ask them what they mean, it's almost always green space or wildlife and not necessarily some of the net zero targets. They're important as well, but the thing that comes to mind on the environment and climate is that tangible stuff that people enjoy in their everyday lives.
Yeah, I think it's how you talk about it as well. I mean, net zero is quite a complex concept to grasp, isn't it? But the loss of green space or your once beautiful river now stinking like a toilet isn't difficult to grasp because you can see it happening. And what people can feel is tangible, they understand better, and that's where they're looking for answers. But the two things are linked. And I think sometimes we talk about net zero, we do get very wonky, all of us. It's not just the think tanks, it's all of us that get very wonky. But where I've seen projects that are great at educating people about the climate crisis and the nature crisis, without resorting to quite over-the-head type of language, is where we promote and support very, very local projects, because people understand that and it makes a difference. So the one that I was involved in when I was leader at Lambeth is we set up a project called Brixton Solar, which was where people living in social housing fundraised, and you could invest as little as 50 quid, but you got a return bigger than you get at the bank, so it was a bit of a saving scheme as well. But you could invest, and it funded solar panels to go on the roof of social housing blocks, which had a lot of flat roof space. It created sustainable energy locally. It created local employment for people who would otherwise not have had a job. But by selling the surplus energy back to the national grid, it created a financial surplus, which a community panel chose to use to support households experiencing energy poverty. So it alleviated poverty. So sustainable energy, local jobs, and alleviating poverty, all that for a single scheme that didn't cost the council a penny. Remarkable. Why aren't we doing more of that right across the whole whole country. But other than those three very good outcomes, it also taught a lot of people about the climate crisis and the energy crisis as well. And I think instead of just talking net zero, we need to talk local action and support our councils to do that kind of work.
Brilliant, thank you so much. Let's open it up and take some questions. Oh, wow, okay. These might be some of the groups helping your induction. So I think
3 weeks in a job, remember.
So I think what we're doing is people are just projecting, because we don't have any other mics, but just for the folks that are watching on the stream, I'll sort of repeat your questions back to you. Okay, there is going to be no system to this whatsoever. Question there, and then I'll do one back there, and then I'll come to this side next, I promise. I'm not biased to the right. Go on.
My name's Tess Collin, a journalist with Ben's Report, an environmental news outlet. Your predecessor, Jim McMahon, he talked about if Labour got in, you'll have a climate and nature test that will run across all policy. And I wanted to ask, is that still on the cards, or is that something you're now going to be reviewing, particularly with all the growth agenda you talked about and Adorena's announcement this morning about development everywhere?
Okay, so a question there on whether previous talk of a climate and nature test might be continued now Steve's in post. Yeah, question with that.
Hello, I'm Ashley from the Blue Green Foundation. We do a lot of work using the ocean as a solution to climate change, and I think there's a real scope to do more of that around the UK. And I was wondering if you ever had any plans to strengthen our marine protections locally to see the ocean as a climate change solution.
Okay, so ocean and marine protections and the degree to which the oceans are part of the solution to some of the issues that we talked about here. And yet one from the back, if you could project as loud as you can, that'd be great.
My name is Amro, I work for the Humane Society International UK, we're an animal protection organisation. And I think one of the elephant in the room, or the cow in the room often in discussions about nature and the environment is industrial animal agriculture and how it contributes to carbon emissions, but also to river pollution, countryside pollution. So I'd just be interested to hear what the Labour government will do to try and address this issue agriculture.
Okay, so the agricultural impact and the kind of emissions impact on climate change. So let's take those three and then I'll come to some more. So yeah.
Yeah, on the test, I need to look more at exactly what the current position is before I can give you a sensible answer to that. But in the same way that we're looking at the impact on climate across everything, and given that the nature crisis and the climate crisis are the same thing really, if not intimately connected, then I'm very interested in seeing how we can practically make that work. But I need to look at it and I need to see exactly what that means in day-to-day decision making, and I need to talk with my colleagues across the front bench as well, because that would be something that doesn't just affect my brief but affects others. But I hope we'll get to a position where before the next election we have a nature manifesto and an agenda for nature, and it will need something like you've just alluded to in order to make it work. So that's work in progress, and I'm sure you'll keep my feet to the fire on that one. But I think there's an awful lot we can do there. And given how bad this government's record has been, I really want to see Labour doing something bold and radical in this way, for all the reasons I outlined before about why Labour has always believed in the stewardship of nature as a key right of every citizen in this country.
Being reviewed, is that a fair statement?
Sorry?
Being reviewed, is that
well, it isn't being yet, but I imagine it will be very soon, yeah. I want to look at it, and I want to look at it very positively. That's right, yeah. Ashley asking about marine protection. The same points apply, really. I'm very aware that our coastal environments and marine environments are very important, not just for biodiversity, but for carbon capture and carbon storage as well. So as part of the climate agenda, as well as a food security agenda, we do need to be looking at how we can better protect and extend the existing protections of those. So that's something we're actively looking at, and I would expect to have policy coming forward on that. I'm interested too, I don't know if you know Tudor Evans, who's the Labour leader of Plymouth City Council, very interested in setting up a national marine park. It's a really interesting concept, and I want to go down there and speak with him and understand exactly how that would work, because I can see huge potential in that as an idea. So again, definitely on the radar and somewhere we want to look at, but we can't go on in the way that we have been, just despoiling nature, whether it's land or sea, way that we have if we want to have a sustainable future, which we do. We're harming ourselves by harming nature. Without nature, there is no economy, there is no food, there is no human society. So the issues that underpin this are really profound, and we will be developing policy in that area. The point about agriculture, the same thing, this links back to some of the environmental land management approaches. So as I said earlier, that we are reviewing. I'm very aware that with nutrient neutrality, runoff from agriculture was as bad a problem, as difficult a problem as sewage going through the waterways as well. So we need to be working with the farming sector to look at how we can support them to use more sustainable practices without pricing them out of the market, because we don't want to create, with food inflation the way that it is, food that people can't afford to eat. So there's obviously, we're going to have to do this in a way that balances both interests, but I do recognise the problem with runoff in particular and the need to use much more sustainable and regenerative farming practices.
Fantastic. Let's take a few more questions. I'm going to go on this side now, so I'll take one from the front here, one from just there, and then one immediately behind you.
Yeah. I'm Phil Shire, CLP delegate from Halifax. It's really a comment actually. For 3 weeks in the job, you've mastered the brief extremely well. But what you're saying is hard-hitting, and surely this is what Labour needs to fight the election on. Hard-hitting policies which are going to make a difference. And are you going to be able to do that, or is it all going to be a bit sort of bland because we can't afford to upset it?
Okay, so a question about how bold Steve is going to be able to be when it comes to the election on some of these issues. Question behind you there.
Right. Thank you very much. Just following on from the question from the Humane Society guy there, I think, and my name is Sanjay. And I think animals are nice.
There we go. We should all open our comments for that. That's great. Okay. Yep.
I just, there were some really important elements to your response that you said there about, making sure that the farmers are looked after and consumers and so on. I didn't hear much there about the welfare of animals, and I just wanted to make sure that you supported a Labour position that's really positive about animal welfare.
Brilliant. Okay, so question there on animal welfare, and then question just behind you. Yeah,
I'm going to stand up, so otherwise I won't be able to project. So my name is Kerry. I also love animals from Hereford, South Herefordshire Labour Party, but also here with colleagues from the Labour Animal Welfare Society. And I think this talk has just shown how vast your brief is, and a lot of the time it gets forgotten that it includes farmed animal welfare, wildlife, but also companion animal welfare, so the cats, the dogs, and the rabbits that we share our lives with. And traditionally, Labour has been ambitious for animal welfare, and you mentioned that death row was traditionally not a controversial area. As animal activists, pretty much every morning over the last few weeks that we've woken up, something else has been trashed. The Kept Animals Bill, Conservatives launched and filibustered on trophy hunting, consultation on cages and farrowing crates has been ditched. So I know it's only your third or fourth week, Steve. I just wanted to hear, like the colleague here, how ambitious you are for animal welfare, and to say, as part of your induction, the Labour Animal Welfare Society would be very willing to take part in that.
Well, thank you. That's very kind. I'm Steve, and I think animals are nice too. And I think for 5 years I chaired the all-party parliamentary group for cats, cat welfare as well, which is run by Cats Protection. So that gave me a really good insight into that particular companion animal. And I have a cat as well. It was two, but sadly one of them died earlier this year, which is very sad. But I'm very aware of the issues around cats and companion animals. Therefore, in general, we've already come up. 3 weeks in the job, we've done some quite big announcements on nutrient neutrality, on sewage, but also on trophy hunting. I don't know whether you spotted that just a few days ago. We will bring in a complete ban on the import of body parts of endangered animals animals that have been slaughtered for trophies. It's disgusting. And it's abhorrent. I'm absolutely committed to doing our part to stop the import of that into our country, but also working globally to stop that from going on, given the nature of how many endangered species that there are because of what humans have done to wildlife and to nature. So I hope from that you're starting to see, Phil, we are already coming up with some quite hard, clear policy, and there will be an awful lot more. I mean, the way that, it's 3.5 years since our biggest election defeat for 85 years, and we've maintained a lead of about 20% for a year in the polls now, and it's given us all hope that if we continue to earn the trust of the British people, we can win the next general election, and there is our chance to give this country its future back. Now, as part of that process, Keir's focused first of all on changing the party, then we make an offer to the country about how we change the country. So you're inevitably going to get less policy in the earlier period. This conference should mark a turning point. You're going to hear a lot more policy from the platform out there, and in the coming months you'll hear more policy coming to further flesh out what Labour's offer to the country will be. Not in my area, I know what we're planning. In the others areas less so, but I know all of my colleagues have been told by Keir that is our expectation. So by the time we get to the next election, I expect us to have a very clear agenda for how we fix the many, many problems that have been left by 13 years of Conservative rule. And what we should never do is create overblown visions but nobody can buy into. What we have to do is show that how we can hit head on the problems and challenges that people experience in their day-to-day lives, and that's what we'll be doing, including in this brief.
Thank you. I have so many questions about the cat APP tube, but I'm not going to spend too long on those. Question all the way at the back there, a question here on the front left, and then a question just there. There'll be another round, I promise, just back there. Yes, sure. No, it was that chap behind you there who's looking very confused. No, who's now looking backwards. You, yeah. Yes, you, sir.
My name's Andy, I'm from the Association of Zoos and Aquariums and Nature Collective. This is really important. We've joined a campaign to see access to nature enshrined as a right in law. What your initial thoughts were?
Whether we need to enshrine access to nature in law. Question there. Thank you very much. Yep.
My name's Deborah Sachs from South Norfolk CLP, and I'd just like to point out quite an easy win for somebody in your brief, which is the circular economy and waste management strategy, because this is a sector where the industry and local government are all pretty clear about what needs to be done. Wales has shown the way, and all you need to do really is take the established orthodoxy from all the people who've been working on this for a very long time and are waiting for the current government to do something about it to make it happen. I think they've actually produced a written document in 2018. Yeah. Just implement it, please.
Great. We love a compliment from Michael Gove. That's great. I'll take that. Question there on the circular economy and waste management, and then there was a third one over there.
Yeah. My name's Jules. I love animals so much I don't eat them. But anyway, my question, because I try and support local communities, especially with organic farming, and we try and grow organic as well. I just wondered if that was part of Labour's, change, and also insecticides. Can that be stopped, please? Because I've heard that it's going to be allowed to start killing our bees.
Okay, so question there on organic farming, insecticides, and how they factor into Labour's plans.
Yeah, right, first one, Andy, wasn't it? Access to nature. Well, for the reasons I said before, I do see the countryside as our shared heritage. It shaped our country, and I'd like to see many, many more people, including people in the countryside, actually, get access to more of the countryside. But we have to do it in a way that is responsible for those who are working the land and growing food for the rest of us on the land. So I think it'll be shaped as responsible access, and there'll be a negotiation between those who aren't living and working on the land and those who are, but we can come to a far better position than the one that we currently have. It was Labour introduced the Rights of Way Act, and there's further that we can go on that. And I want to be talking to all of the interest groups around this to work work out exactly how it will be, but I'll be astonished if that wasn't part of the next Labour manifesto. I'll be pushing for it. The point about the waste management strategy, I do agree with you. We've already got something in the diary, I think, to go to Wales and talk to colleagues there about precisely what they're doing. So I do want to learn from them. And as you say, if that's an easy win, let's have it, because it's a significant change to make. But we've already got the practice in place to tell us how we might need to do it. So yes, thank you for that point. And Jules talking about organic growing and organic farming and pesticides. There are two things here. First of all, I understand the issue about pesticides. It's tricky, isn't it? Because on the one hand, we must do what we can to protect biodiversity and nature. We can't just destroy the soil by what we put into it, because it's no longer sustainable. Of course, we must protect pollinators, but we've got to phase this in a way that doesn't make it impossible for farmers and growers to produce the food that we eat. So there is going to have to be some period where we're looking at interim stages towards dealing with the problem, and there are a lot of people focused on that, and I'm very interested in making sure that we get there. In terms of some of the, you talked about community growing, I think, as well. I'm a big fan of those, and I've seen some fantastic projects where either unused public land is made available for communities that want to grow, whatever it is they want to grow. Fantastic for kids to learn, particularly if they don't know already where their food comes from and how food grows. But another project that I absolutely loved, it linked people who were living in flats that didn't have access to outdoor space with people, sometimes older people who were less mobile now, who had garden space but couldn't garden anymore. And you linked the people in the flats who wanted to do the gardening with the people who had a garden but couldn't garden, and they made use of that space. And it not only gave people access to greenery, but it created relationships quite often between younger people and older people, and tackled the epidemic of loneliness that we have at the same time. So there's so many ways that you can, if you can look at building connections between and within communities, you'll find solutions to problems like this, and the communities will build the solutions for you. But that was a project I absolutely loved when I saw it.
Fantastic. Okay, let's take a few more questions. I'm never going to get to all of these, for which I apologise. Let's go. Question at the front here, one in the middle there, one at the front here, and then one right at the back there. Let's do those four, and I hope we'll have a chance for another quick round. Yeah.
Hi, Alison Ogden-Newton, Chief Executive of Keep Britain Tidy. We do the blue flags for beaches, green flags for public spaces. We have over 500,000 volunteers, so probably part of that 20 million caucus that you were talking about. Two things I wanted to ask you about. Firstly, we work on the concept of the 15-minute community, because we believe that everybody should have access to quality green or blue space within 15 minutes of where they live. That is as relevant for rural communities, by the way, as it is for urban communities. We've recently seen what I can only imagine is a willful misunderstanding of 15-minute communities. This isn't about telling people they can't get in their cars, and it's not telling people when they can go to the shops. This is about what people have the right to expect where they live. Second question.
Can I be very cheeky and only give you one? I'm really sorry, we've got loads we need to get in.
Deposit return scheme. Any thoughts?
Amazing. If every question could just be 3 letters, that would be super helpful. Okay, deposit return scheme, and then 15-minute cities as well. Yeah.
Thomas Baker from the Nature Conservancy. Obviously, DEFRA's brief also includes international partnerships for biodiversity and nature. We're really interested in understanding your plans for working with partners around the world to enhance protection for biodiversity and also scale the finance for nature.
Fantastic. International partnerships for biodiversity. Next up, I think, was here.
Zoe Darlington, Vice Chair, Tewkesbury Labour Party. So I'm in a rural community. I live by 2 rivers, River Avon, River Severn. What's your thoughts on this balance between the damage that agriculture and farming, and particularly farming of meat and livestock, and balancing that against the destruction that it's doing to the environment, particularly the rivers, the River Wye, for example, where it's now unsafe to swim, it's been downgraded from an environmental point of view. Because you talked earlier about having these conversations with farmers when actually a lot of the time they are doing the damage. How do you have those conversations conversations and work through that.
Okay, so question on the degree to which farmers can sometimes be a part of the problem when it comes to some of these challenges. To what extent is that true? And question from the back there.
Hi, it's Anne Cameron, Head of Environment at The Guardian. Just to follow up on that access to nature question, it wasn't quite clear. Is Labour still committed to a right to roam policy?
So is Labour still committed to a right to roam policy? 4 questions for you there.
Yep. You're putting me through my paces. Right, Alison was asking about 15-minute neighbourhoods, which it's a great idea. All it is about allowing people to have access to the things they need nearer to where they live. It's not about restricting, it's about giving people more access to things. No, only a party full of cranks and conspiracy theorists was misrepresent it in the way that the Conservative Party did, but then that is what they are, so it's what you should expect. No, I'm very in favour of 50-minute communities, and rural communities, as you were saying in particular. People have access to so little in so many cases, so of course we need to be working at how we can promote that. On the deposit return scheme, instinctively I'm in favour of that. When I was a kid and I was a cub, I used to go around collecting bottles from people, and then we would keep the money and go to the local Cubs and Scouts groups. That was a great thing. So instinctively I'm in favour of that, but I need to look at working with people like Keep Britain Tidy, exactly how we can make that work, because it seems mad not to make it work, to be honest. We need to reuse and recycle as much as we can, rather than plundering the Earth's resources unnecessarily. It's just blinding obvious, isn't it? Thomas was talking about international partnerships. Yes, of course. We're one country on this one planet, so looking at nature and marine, we can only do this in concert with our friends across the world. So in my team I have Emma Hardy, who is responsible for marine and water, and Toby Perkins is responsible for nature, and as part of their briefs